Okay. This looks really weird on camera. Wow. It's because this light. This looks spooky. I think I gotta change it. Let me turn on a different light. That light is actually great for reading, but it looks really weird on the camera. Still looks kind of weird. Like, I look pretty shabby right now, but I look even more shabby with this overhead light. Oh gosh, it's so bright too. I don't know. I kind of like the low light. Let me see if I can make this work. Let's do this. Let's try to move this. No, this. Okay, this might be better. Yeah, this is better. Okay. Right? Yeah, that's better. Okay, so we're back. We're back. It's pretty dark outside. Let me show you. All you can see is the reflection of the lamp. Anyways, yeah, we're back. We're excited. It's like 4:30. We're really sad that I'm excited, right? I'm excited to be waking up early right now, and I think I got up at like 2 or something. Like, I got a ton of sleep. Basically, I went to bed yesterday at like 3 p.m. or something. Like, I had a huge meal, got really tired, went to bed. Woke up at like 9 p.m. We're back to bed. Woke up at like 2, super well rested. Obviously, I look like dog water right now because I'm taking a shower or anything. But anyways, TMI. What's the point? So I'm excited to wake up early. It's 4:30. Yeah, I haven't done this in a while. It's unfortunate. Yeah, I didn't do it at all last week. I don't think. Like, last week was so busy. It was terrible. Well, it was good. Like, it ended up being okay, but it was bad because, like, I had all this homework to do, and it was just stressful because I couldn't like not get it done because I can't fail in the classes I'm taking because this is like my last semester. So, so I was stressed. Like, my skin was terrible. Like, I wasn't sleeping. I was like catching up on classes, watching lectures for like 5 hours in a row. Like, it was bad. It was bad. But yeah, it makes like now, like what I'm doing right now, it makes it way sweeter because it's like a terrible backdrop, like something I could have to be doing, but I don't. So this is great. This is awesome. So we're basically just gonna go back exactly to what we were doing, except for now we'll be even happier to be doing it. Any other updates? Not really. Yeah, last week was terrible, but this week's so much better. And I'm on spring break on Thursday, so let's go. It's gonna be sick. Okay, so we're doing like NISB. I'm still getting used to this light. It looks weird. Makes me look as bad as I actually look right now. Yeah, I think we're in Deuteronomy chapter 8. Yeah, I feel so bad. Like I didn't even remember where I was reading. I was telling my friend, I was like, I'm pretty sure I'm in Numbers. I'm sorry, this is so bad. Okay, Deuteronomy chapter 8. I know I'm in Psalm 119. That I know for sure. Anyways, whatever. I'm just stalling at this point. Okay, Deuteronomy chapter 8. All the commandments that I'm commanding to you, and that I'm commanding you today, you shall be careful to do, that you may live and multiply, and go in and possess the land which the Lord swore to give to your forefathers. You shall remember all the way which the Lord your God has led you in the wilderness these 40 years, that he might humble you, testing you to know what was in your heart, whether you would keep his commandments or not. He humbled you and let you be hungry, and fed you with manna, which you did not know, nor did your fathers know, that he might make you understand that man does not live by bread alone, but man lives by everything that proceeds out of the mouth of the Lord. Your clothing did not wear out on you, nor did your foot swell these 40 years. Thus you are to know in your heart that the Lord your God was disciplining you, just as a man disciplines his son. Therefore you shall keep the commandments of the Lord your God, to walk in his ways, and to fear him. For the Lord your God is bringing you into a good land of brooks of water, of fountains and springs, flowing forth in valleys and hills, a land of wheat and barley, of vines and fig trees, and pomegranates, a land of olive oil and honey, a land where you will eat food without scarcity, in which you will not lack anything, a land whose stones are iron, and out of whose hills you can dig copper. When you have eaten and are satisfied, you shall bless the Lord your God for the good land which he has given you. Beware that you do not forget the Lord your God by not keeping his commandments and his ordinances and his statutes which I am commanding you today. Otherwise, when you have eaten and are satisfied, and have built good houses and lived in them, and when your herds and your flocks multiply, and your silver and gold multiply, and all that you have multiplies, then your heart will become proud, and you will forget the Lord your God who brought you out from the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. He led you through the great and terrible wilderness, with its fiery serpents and scorpions and thirsty ground where there was no water. He brought water for you out of the rock of flint. In the wilderness he fed you manna which your fathers did not know, that he might humble you and that he might test you, to do good for you in the end. Otherwise you may say in your heart, my power and the strength of my hand made me this wealth. But you shall remember the Lord your God, for it is he who is giving you power to make wealth, that he may confirm his covenant which he swore to your fathers, as it is this day. It shall come about, if you ever forget the Lord your God, and go after other gods and serve them and worship them, I testify against you today that you will surely perish. Like the nations that the Lord makes to perish before you, so you shall perish, because you would not listen to the voice of the Lord your God. Yeah, I've heard. I read a book recently where they quoted that section. I forget what the book was. I feel like I need to get a better understanding from studying the Bible of like where stuff is. Okay, this is the end of Psalm 119. Of old I have known, verse 152. through 176. Of old I have known from of old I have known from your testimonies that you have founded them forever. Look upon my affliction and rescue me, for I do not forget your law. Plead my cause and redeem me. Revive me according to your word. Salvation is far from the wicked, for they do not seek your statutes. Great are your mercies, O Lord. Revive me according to your ordinances. Many are my persecutors, my adversaries, yet I do not turn aside from your testimonies. I behold the treacherous and loathe them, because they do not keep your word. Consider how I love your precepts. Revive me, O Lord, according to your loving kindness. The sum of your word is truth, and every one of your righteous ordinances is everlasting. Princes persecute me without cause. My heart stands in awe of your words. I rejoice at your word, as one who finds great spoil. I hate and despise falsehood, but I love your law. 7 times a day I praise you, because of your righteous ordinances. Those who love your law have great peace, and nothing causes them to stumble. I hope for your salvation, O Lord, and do your commandments. My soul keeps your testimonies, and I love them exceedingly. I keep your precepts and your testimonies, for all my ways are before you. Let my cry come before you, O Lord. Give me understanding according to your word. Let my supplication come before you. Deliver me according to your word. Let my lips utter praise, for you teach me your statutes. Let my tongue sing of your word, for all your commandments are righteousness. Let your hand be ready to help me, for I have chosen your precepts. I long for your salvation, O Lord, and your law is my delight. Let my soul live that it may praise you, and let your ordinances help me. I have gone astray like a lost sheep. Seek your servant. For I do not forget your commandments. John chapter 13. How many chapters is John? 21? Okay. John 13, the Lord's Supper. Now before the feast of the Passover, Jesus, knowing that his hour had come, Now before the feast of the Passover, Jesus, knowing that his hour had come that he would depart out of this world to the Father, having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end. During supper, the devil having already put into the heart of Judas Iscariot, the son of Simon, to betray him, Jesus, knowing that the Father had given all things into his hands, and that he had come forth from God and was going back to God, got up from supper and laid aside his garments, and taking a towel, he girded himself. The grammar of that sentence is weird. In English, it's weird. Right? Then he poured water into the basin and began to wash the disciples' feet and to wipe them with the towel with which he was girded. So he came to Simon Peter. He said to him, Lord, do you wash my feet? Jesus answered and said to him, what I do you do not realize now, but you will understand hereafter. Peter said to him, never shall you wash my feet. Jesus answered him, if I do not wash you, you have no part with me. Simon Peter said to him, Lord, then wash not only my feet, but also my hands, my head. Jesus said to him, he who has bathed needs only to wash his feet, but is completely clean. And you are clean, but not all of you, for he knew the one who was betraying him. For this reason he said, not all of you are clean. So when he had washed their feet and had taken his garments and reclined at the table again, he said to them, do you know what I have done to you? You call me teacher and Lord, and you are right, for so I am. If then the Lord and the teacher washed your feet, you also ought to wash one another's feet. For I gave you an example that you also should do as I did to you. Truly, truly, I say to you, a slave is not greater than his master, nor is one who is sent greater than the one who sent him. If you know these things, you are blessed if you do them. I do not speak of all of you. I know the ones I have chosen, but it is that the scripture may be fulfilled. He who eats my bread has lifted up his heel against me. From now on, I'm telling you before it comes to pass, so that when it does occur, you may believe that I am he. Truly, truly, I say to you, he who receives whomever I send receives me, and he who receives me receives him who sent me. Whoa. He who receives whomever I send receives me, and he who receives me receives him who sent me. It's the exact same. It's the exact same thing. It's like a chain. Who is he sending? Is it the Spirit? Who is he sending? Verse 20. The notes don't say. When Jesus had said this, he became troubled in spirit and testified and said, truly, truly, I say to you that one of you will betray me. The disciples began looking at one another at a loss to know of which one he was speaking. There was reclining on Jesus his bosom one of his disciples whom Jesus loved. So Simon Peter gestured to him and said to him, tell us who it is of whom he is speaking. He, leaning back thus on Jesus' bosom, said to him, Lord, who is it? Jesus then answered, that is the one for whom I shall dip the morsel and give it to him. So when he had dipped the morsel, he took and gave it to Judas, the son of Simon Iscariot. After the morsel, Satan then entered into him. Therefore Jesus said to him, what you do, do quickly. Now no one of those reclining at the table knew for what purpose he had said this to him, for some were supposing because Jesus had the money box that Jesus was saying to him, Buy the things we have need of for the feast, or else that he should give something to the poor. So after receiving the morsel, he went out immediately, and it was night. Therefore, when he had gone out, Jesus said, "Now is the Son of Man glorified, and God is glorified in him. If God is glorified in him, God will also glorify him in himself." Oh man, you can probably tell like I haven't read this in a while. I haven't read this part of John. Oh man. Somebody has to put together all like the if then stuff in this book. Like John specifically. Man. Oh, I didn't finish the sentence. So now is the Son of Man glorified, and God is glorified in him. If God is glorified in him, God will also glorify him in himself, and will glorify him immediately. Little children, I am with you a little while longer. You will seek me, and as I said to the Jews, now I will also say to you, where I am going, you cannot come. A new commandment I give to you, that you love one another, even as I have loved you, that you also love one another. By this, all men will know that you are my disciples, if you have love for one another. Simon Peter said to him, Lord, where are you going? Jesus answered, Where I go, you cannot follow me now, but you will follow later. Peter said to him, Lord, why can I not follow you right now? I will lay down my life for you. Jesus answered, Will you lay down your life for me? Truly, I say to you, truly, truly, I say to you, a rooster will not crow until you deny me 3 times. One sec. Okay. Break off time. Okay. Denial of the knowability of God. The possibility of knowing God has been denied on various grounds. This denial is generally based on the supposed limits of the human faculty of cognition, though it has been presented in several different forms. The fundamental position is that the human mind is incapable of knowing anything of that which lies beyond and behind natural phenomena, and is therefore necessarily ignorant of these supersensible and divine things. Huxley was the first to apply to those who assumed this position, himself included, the name agnostics. They are entirely in line with the skeptics of former centuries and of Greek philosophy. As a rule, agnostics do not like to be branded as atheists, since they do not deny absolutely that there is a God, but declare that they do not know whether he exists or not, and even if he exists, are not certain that they can have any true knowledge of him, and in many cases even deny that they can have any real knowledge of him. Hume has been called, I see, in many cases even deny that they can have any real knowledge of him. Hume has been called the father of modern agnosticism. He did not deny the existence of God, but asserted that we have no true knowledge of his attributes. All our ideas of him are and can only be anthropomorphic. We cannot be sure that there is any reality corresponding to the attributes we ascribe to him. His agnosticism resulted from the general principle that all knowledge is based on experience. It was especially Kant, however, who stimulated agnostic thought by his searching inquiry into the limits of the human understanding and reason. He affirmed that the theoretical reason knows only phenomena and is necessarily ignorant of that which underlies these phenomena, the thing in itself. From this it followed, of course, that it is impossible for us to have any theoretical knowledge of God. But Lotz already pointed out that phenomena, whether physical or mental, are always connected with some substance lying back of them, and that in knowing the phenomena, we also know the underlying substance of which they are manifestations. The Scotch philosopher Sir William Hamilton, while not in entire agreement with Kant, yet shared the intellectual agnosticism of the latter. He asserts that the human mind knows only that which is conditioned and exists in various relations, and that since the absolute and infinite is entirely unrelated, that is, exists in no relations, we can obtain no knowledge of it. But while he denies that the infinite can be known by us, he does not deny its existence. Says he, through faith we apprehend what is beyond our knowledge. His views were shared in substance by Mansell and were popularized by him. To him also it seemed utterly impossible to conceive of an infinite being, though he also professed faith in its existence. The reasoning of these two men did not carry conviction, since it was felt that the absolute or infinite does not necessarily exist outside of all relations, but can enter into various relations, and that the fact that we know things only in their relations does not mean that the knowledge so acquired is merely a relative or unreal knowledge. Comte, I don't know, COMT, the father of positivism, was also agnostic in religion. According to him, man can know nothing but physical phenomena and their laws. His senses are the source of all true thinking, and he can know nothing except the phenomena which they apprehend and the relations in which these stand to each other. Mental phenomena can be reduced to material phenomena, and in science, man cannot get beyond these. Even the phenomena of immediate consciousness are excluded. And further, everything that lies behind the phenomena. Theological speculation represents thought in its infancy. No positive affirmation can be made respecting the existence of God, and therefore both theism and atheism stand condemned. In later life, Comte felt the need of some religion and introduced the so-called religion of humanity. Even more than Comte, Herbert Spencer. Oh, I know Herbert Spencer, philosopher. Or I know of him, at least. He's a funny guy. Even more than Comte, Herbert Spencer is recognized as the great exponent of modern scientific agnosticism. He was influenced very much by Hamilton's doctrine of the relativity of knowledge and by Mansell's conception of the absolute. And in the light of these worked out his doctrine of the unknowable, which was his designation of whatever may be absolute, first or ultimate in the order of the universe, including God. He proceeds on the assumption that there is some reality lying back of phenomena, but maintains that all reflection on it lands us in a contradiction. This ultimate reality is utterly inscrutable. While we must accept the existence of some ultimate power, either personal or impersonal, we can form no conception of it. Inconsistently, he devotes a great part of his first principles to the development of the positive content of the unknowable, as if it were well known indeed. Other agnostics who were influenced by him are such men as Huxley, Fiske, and Clifford. We meet with the agnosticism also repeatedly in modern humanism. Harry Elmer Barnes says, to the writer, it seems quite obvious that the agnostic position is the only one which can be supported by any scientifically minded and critically inclined person in the present state of knowledge. Besides the forms indicated in the preceding, just checking the time. Besides the forms indicated in the preceding, the agnostic argument has assumed several others, of which the following are some of the most important. First, man knows only by analogy. Second, man really knows only what he can grasp in its entirety. Third, all predicates of God are negative and therefore furnish no real knowledge. Fourth, all our knowledge is relative to the knowing subject. First, man knows only by analogy. We know only that which bears some analogy to our own nature or experience. Similia similibus percipientur. But while it is true that we learn a great deal by analogy, we also learn by contrast. In many cases, the differences are the very things that arrest our attention. The scholastics spoke of the via negationis, by which they thought eliminated from God the imperfections of the creature. Moreover, we should not forget that man is made in the image of God and that there are important analogies between the divine nature and the nature of man. Yeah. Second, man really knows only what he can grasp in its entirety. Briefly stated, the position is that man cannot comprehend God, who is infinite, cannot have the exhaustive knowledge of him, and therefore cannot know him. Well, Reformed people agree with the first part, but not the second part. But this position proceeds on the unwarranted assumption that partial knowledge cannot be real knowledge, an assumption which would really invalidate all our knowledge, since it always falls far short of completeness. Our knowledge of God, though not exhaustive, may yet be very real and perfectly adequate for our present needs. Yeah. Third, all predicates of God are negative and therefore furnish no real knowledge. Hamilton says that the absolute and the infinite can only be conceived as a negation of the thinkable, which really means we can have no conception of them at all. But though it is true that much of what we predicate to God is negative in form, this does not mean that it may not at the same time convey some positive idea. The aseity of God includes a positive idea of his self-existence and self-sufficiency. Moreover, such ideas as love, spirituality, and holiness are positive. Fourth, all our knowledge is relative to the knowing subject. Subject. It is said that we know the objects of knowledge not as they are objectively, only as they are related to our senses and faculties. In the process of knowledge, we distort and color them. In a sense, it is perfectly true that all our knowledge is subjectively conditioned. But the import of the assertion under consideration seems to be that because we know things only through the mediation of our senses and faculties, we do not know them as they are. But this is not true insofar as we have any real knowledge of things. That knowledge corresponds to the objective reality. The laws of perception and thought are not arbitrary, but correspond to the nature of things. Without such correspondence, not only the knowledge of God, but all true knowledge would be utterly impossible. There's a common theme here in like the critiques of the critiques, which is basically that they prove too much. Some are inclined to look upon the position of Barth as a species of agnosticism. Zerbi says that the practical agnosticism dominates Barth's thinking and renders him a victim of the Kantian unknowableness of the thing in itself. And quotes him as follows, quote, Romans is a revelation of the unknown God. God comes to man, not man to God. Even after the revelation, man cannot know God, for he is always the unknown God. In manifesting himself to us, he is farther away than ever before. I don't know. It really depends what he means by that, because like a couple pages ago, he was saying that Luther, describes God as the unknown God, right? Like, it depends what he means. No? Maybe I just think that because it's going over my head. Don't listen to what I say about this. I don't know what I'm talking about at all. At the same time, he finds Barth's agnosticism, like that of Herbert Spencer, inconsistent. Says he, quote, it was said of Herbert Spencer, he knew a great deal about the unknowable. So of Barth, one wonders how he came to know so much of the unknown God. Dickey speaks in a similar vein. Quote, and speaking of the transcendent God, Barth seems sometimes to be speaking of a God and of whom we can never know anything. He finds, however, that in this respect, too, there has been a change of emphasis in Barth. While it is perfectly clear that Barth does not mean to be an agnostic, it cannot be denied that some of his statements can readily be interpreted as having an agnostic flavor. He strongly stresses the fact that God is the hidden God who cannot be known from nature, history, or experience, but only by his self-revelation in Christ when it meets with the response of faith. But even in this revelation, God appears only as the hidden God. God reveals himself exactly as the hidden God, and through his revelation makes us more conscious of the distance which separates him from man than we ever were before. What's wrong with that? I don't know. Again, don't listen to me on this. Sorry. I should just stop talking. I should just stop. Okay. This can easily be interpreted to mean that we learn by revelation merely that God cannot be known. So that after all, we are face to face with an unknown God. But in view of all that Barth has written, this is clearly not what he wants to say. His assertion that in the light of revelation we see God as the hidden God does not exclude the idea that by revelation we also acquire a great deal of useful knowledge of God as he enters into relation with his people. When he says that even in his revelation, God still remains for us the unknown God, he really means the incomprehensible God. That's what I'm saying. That's like reformed, right? That's exactly what Berkhoff is saying. Reformed says about no ability of God is just incomprehensible. His revelation, God still remains. Sorry. He really means the incomprehensible God. The revealing God is God in action. By his revelation, we learn to know him in his operations, but acquire no real knowledge of his inner being. The following passage in the doctrine of the Word of God is rather illuminating. Quote, on this freedom rests the inconceivability of God, the inadequacy of all knowledge of the revealed God, even in three-in-oneness of God. Even the three-in-oneness of God is revealed to us only in God's operations. Therefore, the three-in-oneness of God is also inconceivable to us. Hence, too, the inadequacy of all our knowledge is of the three-in-oneness. Hence, too, the inadequacy of all our knowledge of the three-in-oneness. The conceivability with which it has appeared to us, primarily in Scripture, secondarily in the church doctrine of the Trinity, is a creaturely conceivability. To the conceivability in which God exists for himself, it is not only relative, it is absolutely separate from it. Only upon the free grace of revelation does it depend that the former conceivability in its absolute separation from its object is yet not without truth. In this sense, the three-in-oneness of God, as we know it from the operation of God, is truth. Grunah. Application, use for information on 2 points as to holiness. Use first. The information afforded in the preceding bearing on those two particulars, namely, as to maintaining the power of holiness and as to the possibility of doing so. First, if we are thus to endeavor the maintaining of the power of holiness, then sure there is such a thing as righteousness and unrighteousness, holiness and sin that opposeth it. Yet there is a generation of men that make these things to be mere fancies, as if all the existence they had were in the melancholy imaginations of some poor spirited, timorous men who dream of these things, and then are scared with the bugbears that their own foolish thoughts represent to them. Bugbears. Hence, some among us have dared to make it their boast and glorying that they have at last got from under the bondage of that tyrant conscience. They can now do that which we call swearing, lying, yea, what not, without being bearded and checked by an imperious conscience. Yea, they assert that there is no sin to any but him that thinks so. These are worse fools than be the psalmist speaks of, than he the psalmist speaks of, Psalm 24 or Psalm 14:1. He doth but say, quote, say in his heart there is no God. But these tell the world what fools they are and cannot hide their shame. I do not mention these so much to confute them. They were to as little purpose as to go prove there is a sun shining in a clear day because a mad frantic man denies it, as rather to affect your hearts with the abominations of the times, yea, ye holy ones of God. Oh, how deep asleep were men, that the enemy could come and sow such tares as these among us. Perhaps they thought such poisonous seed would not grow in our soil that hath had so much labor and cost bestowed on it by Christ's husbandmen, that such strong delusions would never go down with any that had been used to so pure a gospel diet. But alas, we see by woeful experience that as a plague, when it hits into a city that stands in the purest air, oft rages more than in another place. So when a spirit of delusion falls upon a people that have enjoyed most of the gospel, it grows most prodigious. It makes me even tremble to think what a place of nettles England, that hath so long continued, without wrong to any other church Christ hath in the world. One of his fairest, fruitfulest garden plots may at last become, when I see what weeds have sprung up in our days. I have heard that Reverend and Holy Master Greenham say he feared rather atheism than popery would be England's ruin. Had he lived in our dismal days, he would have had his fears much increased. Were there ever more atheists made and making in England since it was acquainted with the gospel than in the compass of a dozen years last past? I have reason to think there were not. When men shall fall so far from the profession of the gospel, and be so blinded that they cannot know light from darkness, righteousness from unrighteousness, are they not far gone in atheism? This is not natural blindness. For the heathen could tell when they did good and evil, and see holiness from sin without scripture light to show them, Romans 2:14-15. No, this blindness is the plague of God fallen on them, for rebelling against the light when they could see it. And if this plague should grow more common, which God forbid, woe then to England. Second, if we be to maintain the power of holiness, then surely it is possible. God would not command what he doth not enable his own peculiar people to do. Only here you must remember carefully the distinction premised in the opening of the text between a legal righteousness and an evangelical righteousness. The latter of these is so far from being unattainable that there is not a sincere Christian in the world but is truly holy in this sense. That is, he doth truly desire and conscionably endeavor, with some success of his endeavor through divine grace assisting, to walk according to the rule of God's word. I confess, all of Christ's scholars are not of the same form. All his children are not of the same stature and strength. Some foot is more some footed more nimbly in the ways of holiness than others. Yet not a saint, but is endued with the principle of life that sets him at work for God and to desire to do more than he is able. As the seed, though little in itself, yet hath in it virtually the bigness and height of a grown tree, towards which it is putting forth with more and more strength of nature as it grows. So in the very first principle of grace planted at conversion, there is a perfection of grace contained in a sense, that is, a disposition putting the creature forth in desires and endeavors, after that perfection to which God hath appointed him in Christ Jesus. This is being explained very, very, I want to say clearly, but I mean like more than clearly, like it's not just clear, it's like, I don't know. I feel like this is an advanced perspective on it. And therefore, Christian, whenever such thoughts of the possibility of obtaining this holiness here on earth are suggested to thee, reject them as sent in from Satan, and that on a design to feed thy own distrustful humor, which he knows they will suit too well. As the news of giants and high walls that the spies brought into the unbelieving Israelites did them, and all to weaken thy endeavors after holiness. Wow. Which he knows will surely prove him a liar. I guess what I mean by clear is like it's not just clear, like unambiguous, it's also like deep. Like he's going in layers that you don't hear, even if someone were to preach this on Sunday. Like it's like if you heard this on Sunday, you'd be like, this is deeper than normal. Like do but strongly resolve to be conscientious in thy endeavors with an eye upon the promise of help, and the work will go in. Thou needest not fear it, for the Lord God is a sun and a shield. He will give grace and glory. No good thing will he withhold from them that walk uprightly. Psalm 84:11. Mark that grace and glory, that is, grace unto glory. He will stand hast till thy grace on earth commenceth glory in heaven. Matthew Henry, Genesis chapter 9, verse 12. And God said, This is the token of the covenant which I make between me and you and every living creature that is with you, for perpetual generations. I do set my bow in the I do set my bow in the cloud, and it shall be for a token of the covenant between me and the earth. And it shall come to pass when I bring a cloud over the earth, that the bow shall be seen in the cloud. And I will remember my covenant, which is between me and you, and every living creature of all flesh. And the waters shall no more become a flood to destroy all the flesh. And the bow shall be in the cloud. and I will look upon it, that I may remember the everlasting covenant between God and every living creature of all flesh that is upon the earth. And God said unto Noah, This is the token of the covenant which I have established between me and all the flesh that is upon the earth. So much repetition. Articles of agreement among men are usually sealed. That the covenants may be the more solemn, and the performances of the covenants the more sure to mutual satisfaction. God, therefore, being willing more abundantly to show to the heirs of promise the immutability of his counsels, has confirmed his covenant by a seal. Hebrews 4:17, 6:17. Which makes the foundations we build on stand sure. 2 Timothy 2:19. The seal of this covenant of nature was natural enough. It was the rainbow, which it is likely was seen in the clouds before, when second causes concurred, but was never a seal of the covenant until now, that it was made so by a divine institution. Now, concerning this seal of the covenant, observe first, this seal is affixed with repeated assurances of the truth of that promise of which it was designed to be the ratification. Quote, I do set my bow in the cloud. It shall be seen in the cloud, that the eye may affect the heart and confirm the faith. And it shall be, quote, the token of the covenant. And I will remember my covenant, that the water shall no more become a flood. Nay, as if the eternal mind needed a memorandum. Quote, I will look upon it, that I may remember the everlasting covenant. Thus here is line upon line, that we might have sure and strong consolation, who have laid hold of this hope. Second, the rainbow appears when the clouds are most disposed to wet, and returns after the rain. Oh, I never thought of that. Oh my gosh. I never thought of that before. All right. The rainbow appears when the clouds are most disposed to wet and returns after the rain, when we have most reason to fear the rain prevailing. Then God shows this seal of the promise that it shall not prevail. Thus, God obviates our fears with such encouragements as are both suitable and seasonable. Oh, man. Yeah. Okay. Third, the thicker the cloud and the brighter the bow in the cloud. The bow. Getting tripped up here. The thicker the cloud, the brighter the bow in the cloud. Thus, as threatening afflictions abound, encouraging consolations much more abound. 1 Corinthians 1:5. Fourth, the rainbow appears when one part of the sky is clear. Which intimates mercy remembered in the midst of wrath. And the clouds are hemmed, as it were, with the rainbow, that they may not overspread the heavens. For the bow is colored rain, the edges of the cloud gilded. Fifth, the rainbow is the reflection of the beams of the sun, which intimates that all the glory and significancy of the seals of his covenant are derived from Christ, the Son of Righteousness, who is also described with a rainbow about his throne, Revelations 4:3. Didn't know that. And a rainbow upon his head, Revelations 10:1, which intimates not only his majesty, but his mediatorship. Sixth, the rainbow has fiery colors in it to signify that God will not again drown the world. Yet, when the mystery of God shall be finished, a world shall be consumed by fire. 7. A bow bespeaks terror, but this bow has neither string nor arrow, as the bow ordained against the persecutors has. Psalm 7, 12, 13. And a bow alone will do little execution. It is a bow, but it is directed upwards. It is directed upwards, not towards the earth. For the seals of the covenant were intended to comfort, not to terrify. 8. As God looks upon the bow, that he may remember the covenant, so should we, as we also may be ever mindful of the covenant with faith and thankfulness. Okay. This is like classic Henry, and I have to take a picture of this because it's like it reminds me of how for the two Owen treatises I read, I had to take a picture of the longest sentence in the Owen treatise because I had to be able to tell people like this is like the funniest thing I found in like the whole book because the sentence is legitimately like 2 paragraphs. So just as like a fun thing to remember this commentary by, I have to take a picture of that because that's been like the funniest thing. That's the most Henry-esque, I think, section that I've ever read in this so far, which is that he's extracted like 8 non-trivial, like comforting truths from one like symbol in the story, which is the rainbow. So, all right, gotta take a pic. Woo. It's amazing. It's amazing. Okay. And it's like funny because like you read it and you're like, I see what he's talking about. You know, it's not like it's not even like a stretch. Okay, I have to go to the bathroom again. I'll be back. Wait, and was that the end of this one? Yeah, it was. Okay, one sec. Okay, one more from Henry. One more section. Pericope, if you will. So Genesis 9:18 through 23. And the sons of Noah that went forth of the ark were Shem, Ham, and Japheth. And Ham is the father of Canaan. These are the 3 sons of Noah. and of them was the whole earth overspread. And Noah began to be a husbandman, and he planted a vineyard, and he drank of the wine, and was drunken, and he was uncovered within his tent. And Ham, the father of Canaan, saw the nakedness of his father, and told his two brethren without. And Shem and Japheth took the garment and laid it upon their shoulders, and went backward, and covered the nakedness of their father, and their faces were backward, and they saw not their father's nakedness. Here is first Noah's family and employment. The names of his sons are again mentioned, as those from whom the whole earth was overspread, by which it appears that Noah, after the flood, had no more children. All the world came from these three. Note. Oops. Note, God, when he pleases, can make a little one to become 1,000, and greatly increase the latter end of those whose beginning was small. Yep. Such are the power and efficacy of a divine blessing. The business Noah applied himself to was that of a husbandman. Hebrew, in Hebrew, yeah, sorry. In Hebrew, a man of the earth. That is, a man dealing in the earth that kept ground in his hand and occupied it. We are all naturally men of the earth, made of it, living on it and hastening to it. Many are sinfully so, addicted to earthly things. Noah was by his calling led to trade in the fruits of the earth. He began to be a husbandman, that is, some time after his departure out of the ark. He returned to his old employment, from which he had been diverted by the building of the ark, first and probably afterwards by the building of a house on dry land for himself and family. For this good, while he had been a carpenter, for this good while he had been a carpenter, but now he began again to be a husbandman. Observe, though Noah was a great man and a good man, an old man and a rich man, a man greatly favored by heaven and honored on earth, yet he would not live an idle life, nor think the husbandman's calling below him. Note, though God by his providence may take us off from our callings for a time, yet when the occasion is over, we ought with humility and industry to apply ourselves to them again. And in the calling wherein we are called, faithfully to abide with God. 1 Corinthians 7:24. Second, Noah's sin and shame. He planted a vineyard, and when he had gathered his vintage, probably he appointed a day of mirth and feasting in his family, and had his son and their children with him, to rejoice with him in the increase of the house as well as in the increase of his vineyard. And we may suppose he prefaced his feast with a sacrifice to the honor of God. If this was omitted, it was just with God to leave him to himself. That he who did not begin with God might end with the beasts. But we charitably hope that it was not, and perhaps he appointed this feast with a design at the close of it to bless his sons as Isaac, that I may eat and that my soul may bless thee. At this feast he drank of the wine, for who planteth a vineyard and eateth not of the fruit of it? But he drank too liberally, more than his head at this age would bear, for he was drunk. We have the reason to think he was never drunk before nor after. Observe how he came now to be overtaken in this fault. It was his sin, and a great sin, so much the worse for its being so soon after a great deliverance. But God left him to himself as he did Hezekiah, 2 Chronicles 32:31. And he has left this miscarriage and he has left this miscarriage of his upon record to teach us. First,
that the fairest copy that ever mere man wrote since the fall had its blots and false strokes. It was said of Noah that he was perfect in his generations. Chapter 6, verse 9. But this shows that it is meant of sincerity, not a sinless perfection. Second, that sometimes those who, with watchfulness and resolution, have, by the grace of God, kept their integrity in the midst of temptation, have, through security and carelessness and neglect of the grace of God, been surprised into sin when the hour of temptation has been over. Noah, who had kept sober in drunken company, is now drunk in sober company. Henry's a genius. He's actually 500 IQ. Let him that thinks he stands take heed. Third, that we have need to be very careful when we use God's good creatures plentifully, lest we use them to excess. Christ's disciples must take heed lest at any time their hearts be overcharged. Luke 21:34. Now the consequence of Noah's sin was shame. He was uncovered within his tent, made naked to his shame, as Adam when he had eaten forbidden fruit. Yet Adam sought concealment. Noah is so destitute of thought and reason that he seeks no covering. This was a fruit of the vine that Noah did not think of. Observe here that the great evil of the sin of drunkenness. First, it discovers men. What infirmities they have, they betray when they are drunk, and what secrets they are entrusted with are then easily got out of them. Drunken porters keep open gates. Second, it disgraces men and exposes them to contempt. As it shows them, so it shames them. Men say and do that when drunk, which when they are sober they would blush at the thought of. Habakkuk 2:15-16. Third, here is Ham's impudence and impiety. He saw the nakedness of his father and told his two brethren. To see it accidentally and involuntarily would not have been a crime, but first he pleased himself with the sight, as the Edomites looked upon the day of their brother, pleased and insulting. Perhaps Ham had sometimes been himself drunk and reproved for it by his good father, whom he was therefore pleased to see thus overcome. Note, it is common for those who walk in false ways themselves to rejoice at the false steps which they sometimes see others make. But charity rejoices not in iniquity, nor can true penitents that are sorry for their own sins rejoice in the sins of others. Second, he told his two brethren without, in a scornful, deriding manner, that his father might seem vile unto them. It is very wrong, first, to make jest of sin, and to be puffed up with that for which we should rather mourn. 1 Corinthians 5:2. And second, to publish the faults of any, especially of parents, whom it is our duty to honor. Noah was not only a good man, but had been a good father to him, and this was a most base, disingenuous requital to him for his tenderness. Ham is here called the father of Canaan, which intimates that he who was himself a father should have been more respectful to him that was his father. Here is, fourth, the pious care of Shem and Japheth to cover their poor father's shame. They not only would not see it themselves, but provided that no one else might see it, herein setting us an example of charity with reference to other men's sin and shame. We must not only say a confederacy with those that proclaim it, but we must be careful to conceal it, or at least to make the best of it, so doing as we would be done by. First, there is a mantle of love to be thrown over the faults of all. 1 Peter 4:8. Second, besides this, there is a robe of reverence to be thrown over the faults of parents and other superiors. Chapter 18, Volume 2, Chapter 18, Pride and Prejudice. Okay, the first week of their return was soon gone. Wait, sorry, let me see where we are. Okay, Elizabeth's at home, and so is Jane. Okay, chapter 18. First week of their return was soon gone. The second began. It was the last of the regiment's stay in Merton, and all the young ladies in the neighborhood were drooping apace.
Gotta save that one. Drooping apace.
The dejection was almost universal. The elder Miss Bennets alone were still able to eat, drink, and sleep and pursue the usual course of their employments. Very frequently were they reproached for this insensibility by Kitty and Lydia, whose own misery was extreme, and who could not comprehend such hard-heartedness in any of the family. Good heaven, what is to become of us? What are we to do? Would they often exclaim in the bitterness of woe. How can you be smiling so, Lizzie? Their affectionate mother shared all their grief. She remembered what she had herself endured on a similar occasion 25 years ago. 25 years ago. I'm sure, said she, I cried for 2 days together when Colonel Miller's regiment went away. I thought I should have broke my heart. I am sure I shall break mine, said Lydia. If one could but go to Brighton, observed Mrs. Bennet. Oh yes, if one could but go to Brighton, but Papa is so disagreeable. A little sea bathing would set me up forever. And my Aunt Phillips is sure it would do me a great deal of good, added Kitty. I wonder, is Kitty like a real name or is that like a nickname? Because that just seems like a weird real name. Kitty? Maybe it's like Catherine or something. Such were the kind of lamentations resounding perpetually through Longbird House. Elizabeth tried to be diverted by them, but all sense of pleasure was lost in shame. She felt anew the justice of Mr. Darcy's objections, and never had she before. Oh, she's going to start liking him now. Never had she before been so much disposed to pardon his interference in the views of his friend. Yeah, she's going to. Yep. Okay. But the gloom of Lydia's prospect was shortly cleared away, for she received an invitation from Mrs. Forster, the wife of the colonel of the regiment, to accompany her to Brighton. This invaluable friend was a very young woman, and very lately married. Who is this? Who's Mrs. Forster? Like, did we see her before? Do we know who this is? Whatever. This is Lydia. What's that? A resemblance and good humor and good spirits had recommended her and Lydia to each other, and out of their 3 months' acquaintance, they had been intimate 2 months. The rapture of Lydia on this occasion, her adoration of Mrs. Forster, the delight of Mrs. Bennet, and the mortification of Kitty are scarcely to be described. Wholly inattentive to her sister's feelings, Lydia flew about the house in restless ecstasy. calling for everyone's congratulations and laughing and talking with more violence than ever, whilst the luckless Kitty continued in the parlor, repining at her fate in terms as unreasonable as her accent was peevish. I cannot see why Mrs. Forster should not ask me as well as Lydia, said she. Though I am not her particular friend, I have just as much right to be asked as she has, and more too, for I am 2 years older. Oh, she's older. In vain did Elizabeth attempt to make her reasonable, and Jane to make her resigned. As for Elizabeth herself, this invitation was so far from exciting in her the same feelings as in her mother and Lydia, that she considered it as the death warrant of all possibility of common sense for the latter. And detestable as such a step might make her were it known, she could not help secretly advising her father to not let her go. What? Why? She represented to him all the improprieties of Lydia's general behavior, the little advantage she could derive from the friendship of such a woman as Mrs. Forster, and the probability of her being yet more imprudent with such a companion at Brighton, where the temptations must be greater than at home. He heard her attentively and then said, Lydia will never be easy till she has exposed herself in some public place or other, and we can never expect her to do it with so little expense or inconvenience to her family as under the present circumstances. That's kind of sad, but it's kind of tough love, I guess. I don't know. If you were aware, said Elizabeth, of the very great disadvantage to us all which must arise from the public notice of Lydia's unguarded and imprudent manner, nay, which has already arisen from it, I'm sure you would judge differently in the affair. Already arisen, repeated Mr. Bennet. What, has she frightened away some of your lovers? Poor little Lizzie, but do not be cast down. Such squeamish youths as cannot bear to be connected with a little absurdity are not worth a regret. Come, let me see of this list of the pitiful fellows who have been kept aloof by Lydia's folly. Indeed, you are mistaken. I have no such injuries to resent. It is not of peculiar, but of general evils which I am now complaining. Our importance, our respectability in the world, must be affected by the wild volatility, the assurance and disdain of all restraint, which mark Lydia's character. Excuse me, for I must speak plainly. If you, my dear father, will not take the trouble of checking her exuberant spirits, and of teaching her that her present pursuits are not to be the business of her life, she will soon be beyond the reach of amendment. Her character will be fixed, and she will, at 16, be the most determined flirt that ever made herself and her family ridiculous. A flirt, too, in the worst and meanest degree of flirtation. Meanest degree. Without any attraction beyond youth and a tolerable person. And from the ignorance and emptiness of her mind, wholly unable to ward off any portion of that universal contempt which her rage for admiration will excite. In this danger, Kitty is also comprehended. She will follow wherever Lydia leads, vain, ignorant, idle, and absolutely uncontrolled. She's going up right now. Oh, my dear father, can you suppose it possible that they will not be censured and despised wherever they are known, and that their sisters will not be often involved in the disgrace? Mr. Bennet saw that her whole heart was in the subject, and affectionately taking her hand, said in reply, Do not make yourself uneasy, my love. Whenever you and Jane are known, you must be respected and valued, and you will not appear too less advantaged for having a couple of, or I may say, 3 very silly sisters, who shall have no peace at Longbourn, if Lydia does not go to Brighton. Let her go then. Colonel Forster is a sensible man, and will keep her out of any real mischief, and she is luckily too poor to be an object of prey to anybody. At Brighton, she will be of less importance, even as a common flirt, than she was seen here. Than she has been here. The officers will find women better worth their notice. Let us hope, therefore, that her being there may teach her her own insignificance. At any rate, she cannot grow many degrees worse without authorizing us to lock her up for the rest of her life. With this answer, Elizabeth was forced to be content, but her own opinion continued the same, and she left him disappointed and sorry. It was not in her nature, however, to increase her vexations by dwelling on them. She was confident of having performed her duty, and to fret over unavoidable evils or augment them by anxiety was no part of her disposition. Had Lydia and her mother known the substance of her conference with her father, their indignation would hardly have found expression in their united volubility. In Lydia's imagination, a visit to Brighton comprised every possibility of earthly happiness. She saw with the creative eye of fancy the streets of that gay bathing place covered with officers. It's like heaven for her. She saw herself the object of attention to tens into scores of them at present unknown. She saw all the glories of the camp, its tents stretched forth in beauteous uniformity of lines, crowded with the young and the gay, and dazzling with scarlet, and to complete the view, she saw herself seated beneath a tent, tenderly flirting with at least 6 officers at once. It's unrealistic. I think her dad has a point. It's like you have to have a negative experience, or you have to. If you have like annoying behavior, you have to get the feedback of people to change. You know what I mean? Had she known that her sister sought to tear her from such prospects and such realities as these, what would have been her sensations? They could have been understood only by her mother, who might have felt nearly the same. Lydia's going to Brighton was all that consoled her for the melancholy conviction of her husband's never intending to go there himself. But they were entirely ignorant of what had passed, and their raptures continued with little intermission to the very day of Lydia's leaving home. Elizabeth was now to see Mr. Wickham for the last time. Oh yeah, good. I haven't been frequently in company with him since her return. Oh really? We didn't hear that. Agitation was pretty well over. The agitations of former partiality entirely so. She had even learned to detect in the very gentleness which had first delighted her an affectation and a sameness to disgust. What? She had even learned to detect in the very gentleness which had first delighted her, an affectation and a sameness to disgust and weary. What does it mean? What? In his present behavior to herself, moreover, she had a fresh source of displeasure, for the inclination he seemed testified of renewing those attentions which had marked the early part of their acquaintance could only serve, after what had since passed, to provoke her. She lost all concern for him in finding herself thus selected as the object of such idle and frivolous gallantry. And while she steadily repressed it, could not but feel the reproof contained in his believing that however long and for whatever cause his attentions had been withdrawn, her vanity would be gratified and her preference secured at any time by the renewal. Wow. I like how this book like discusses like things which happen like what am I saying? I feel like people can relate to that. Like me as a guy, it's like I relate to the other end of that, right? Excuse me. It's like, yeah, I feel like everyone knows what that's like when someone is interested in you now and you just don't care about them at all because either you're kind of offended that they think they can just like, I mean, this has to do with like dating, right? Attraction. So, I'm going to stop trying to put it into words, but I feel like everyone can relate somewhat to this. On the very last day of the regiment's remaining in Meryton, he dined with others of the officers at Longbourn. Wickham, that is, I think. And so little was Elizabeth disposed to part from him in good humour, that on his making some inquiry as to the manner in which her time had passed at Hunsford, he mentioned Colonel Fitzwilliams and Mr. Darcy's having both. She mentioned Colonel Fitzwilliams and Mr. Darcy's having both spent 3 weeks at Rosings, and asked him if he were acquainted with the former. Dude, she's trolling now. He looked surprised, displeased, and alarmed, but with a moment's recollection and returning smile, replied that he had formerly seen him often, and after observing he was a very gentlemanlike man, asked her how she had liked him. Her answer was warmly in his favor, with an air of indifference. He soon afterwards added, "How long did you say that he was at Rosings?" "Nearly 3 weeks. And you saw him frequently?" "Yes, almost every day." "His manners are very different from his cousin's." "Yes, very different, but I think Mr. Darcy improves on acquaintance." "Indeed," cried Wickham, with a look which did not escape her. "And pray, may I ask," but checking himself, he added in a gayer tone, "is it in address that he improves? Has he deigned to add aught of civility to his ordinary style? For I dare not hope," he continued in a lower and more serious tone, "that he is improved in essentials." Essentials. What a book. What a book. "Oh no," said Elizabeth. "In essentials, I believe he is very much what he ever was." Elizabeth is speaking in cryptic puzzles here. "Oh no," said Elizabeth. Oh, whoops. While she spoke, Wickham looked as if scarcely knowing whether to rejoice over her words or to distrust their meaning. I get. There was a something in her countenance which made him listen with an apprehensive and anxious attention, while she added, "Yeah, well, he's reading her well, because she doesn't care about it." Quote, "When I said that he improved on acquaintance, I did not mean that either his mind or manners were in a state of improvement. But from knowing him better, his disposition was better understood." Wickham's alarm now appeared in a heightened complexion and agitated look. For a few minutes he was silent, till, shaking off his embarrassment, he turned to her again and said in the gentlest of accents, "You, who so well know my feelings toward Mr. Darcy, will readily comprehend how sincerely I must rejoice that he is wise enough to assume even the appearance of what is right. His pride in that direction may be of service, if not to himself, to many others, for it must deter him from such foul misconduct as I have suffered by. I only fear that the sort of cautiousness to which you, I imagine, have been alluding is merely adopted on his visits to his aunt, of whose good opinion and judgment he stands much in awe. His fear of her has always operated, I know, when they were together, and a good deal is to be imputed to his wish of forwarding the match with Miss de Bourgh, which I am certain he has very much at heart. Elizabeth could not repress a smile at this, but she answered only by a slight inclination of the head. She saw that he wanted to engage her on the old subject of his grievances, and she was in no humor to indulge him. The rest of the evening passed with the appearance on his side of usual cheerfulness, but with no farther attempt to distinguish Elizabeth, and they parted at last with mutual civility, possibly a mutual desire of never meeting again. Wow. Again, I think people can relate to this too. It's like when cumulatively, like thoughts have been shared between you and someone else, where you kind of both think you're not interested in each other anymore. And that feeling that like you're giving off an appearance of usual cheerfulness, but on the inside you're like, this is not what it was before. That's the worst. That is the worst. Dang, okay. Wow. I think this is kind of like a dark horse chapter. I think I really like this chapter. But the story is so different from the story that made the other really good chapters good. It's good for like a different reason. When the party broke up, Lydia returned with Mrs. Forster to Meryton, from whence they were to set out early the next morning. The separation between her and her family was rather noisy than pathetic. Kitty was the only one who shed tears, but she did weep from vexation and envy. Mrs. Bennet was diffuse in her good wishes for the felicity of her daughter, and impressive in her injunctions that she would not miss the opportunity of enjoying herself as much as possible. Advice, which there was every reason to believe would be attended to, and in the clamorous happiness of Lydia herself, in bidding farewell, the more gentle adieus of her sister were uttered without being heard.
What a book. Some of the sentences were out of pocket, though, in that chapter. They were kind of ridiculous. Some of them. Okay, probably enough for today. All right, thanks for entertaining this, and see you next time.